Today I'm going to show you guys how to create this cute and simple daddy longleg character. We're going to make his body using metaballs. We're going to make his fangs using some sculpting tools. We're going to make his legs using paths and his eyes using basic geometry. We're also going to apply some basic materials and learn how to set up some simple lighting. Let's get started. If you guys have not downloaded Blender 2.8 yet, you can go to blender.org and click on Get Blender 2.8 Beta and follow all of the installation prompts. So to get started on our daddy longleg, I'm going to go ahead and delete my default cube. And then I'm going to change a few things about my overlays, like turning off my extras, turning off my 3D cursor, and turning off my grid. And then I'm going to come up here to my shading tab and change my matte cap to the tan color. And I'm going to change to my viewport for the background. I'm also going to come up to my corner and drag in a few extra windows so that I can get two side views along with my perspective view that I'll have on the side. So this top one is going to have a front view by hitting number 1, and this bottom one's going to have a side view by hitting number 3. If you can't hit your number keys in order to change your views, you can come up here to Edit and go to Preferences, and under Input you can make sure that Emulate Numpad is selected. Okay, so to get started on our daddy longleg, we need to add parts for the body. So we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to add in a ball. And in our tool panel, we're going to make sure that the resolution is as far down as it can go. And then in our side view, we're going to hit Shift D to add in another meta ball. And the reason why we're doing it in the side view is because no matter how I move it now, it can only move along the Y-axis or the Z-axis. This ensures that it's locked to a specific axis, and that way I can't ever have it like misplaced or put into a wrong position along the X-axis. So that's why I like to have all three of these windows open. Now I'm going to scale it smaller and bring it forward maybe a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to scale both my front part of my abdomen and my back part of my abdomen along the X and the Z. And I have to do them individually or else it won't work. So I'm going to grab my front one and I'm going to scale it a little bit along the X so that it's narrow. And a little bit on the Z so that it's a little bit shorter. Cool, now I'm going to grab my back one and do the same thing. I'm going to scale it on the X so it's nice and skinny. And scale it a little bit on the Z. Cool, that looks pretty good. Okay, so now in our bottom left window we're going to hit Shift D again so that we can start adding in some eye lumps. So Shift D, bring it forward, hit your S key to scale it down, and then drag it up and drag it over. These are not going to be our actual eyes, these are just the lumps that the eyes are going to be kind of poking out of, because this is more of a character daddy longleg rather than a realistic one. I figure they look more cartoony when they have little eye lumps. I want them to be a little bit more forward. It looks kind of weird being way back there. Gonna bring it about right here. Okay, and so since we're using metaballs right now, and not an actual mesh or not actual geometry, we can't mirror it. So what we have to do is come up to our top view, and to make sure that we're only along the X-axis, we can hit Shift D in this top view, and that way it won't move at all along the Y, no matter how I move it. I'm going to place that on the opposite side. Cool. Now I'm going to add fangs, so I'm going to hit Shift D and bring it down and bring it forward. These are going to be at the front of the face. Shift D again in the top view to bring it over. There we go. Let's make these a little bit smaller. That looks about good right there. Just want this one, bring it down a little bit. I want them to be about as even as possible because since I can't mirror them, and the reason why is because we haven't turned it into a mesh yet, if I start adding in my fangs and they aren't mirrored perfectly, then the fangs could look slightly crooked, so I try to get them as close as possible, seeing as how we can't mirror our metaballs. Okay, next we're going to start adding in some leg lumps. So let's hit Shift D, bring it up and over, and a daddy long leg has about 3 of them that are definitely on the front abdomen, and then there's one that's like slightly attached to the back part of the abdomen. So the front one's about halfway up. Scale it maybe a little bit tinier. Hit Shift D to add the next one. The next one's a little bit higher up. Like this. Shift D to add the next one. This one can go a little bit further down again. And Shift D to add the last one. The last one's about even with where the third one was. Let's scale this one a little bit. Scale it along the X so that it pokes out a little bit more. There we go. Cool. So once again, we can't mirror our metaballs, so we're just going to grab one at a time and then mirror it to the other side in one of our axis views. So I'm going to hit Shift D on the first one, if I can grab it. Shift D and drag it over to the other side. Shift D on the next one, drag it over to the other side. There we go. Now I have my leg lumps on both sides of my daddy long leg. Okay, so now that I have the base made up for the body of my daddy long leg, I can go ahead and convert my metaballs into a mesh. But before I do that, I want to lower the resolution a little bit more, because where these leg lumps are, the edges where it meets the body is still way too chunky, and if I convert it into a mesh, we won't be able to fix that later. So I'm going to come back over here to my resolution and lower it to something like 0.03, which I have to type in at this point because you can only drag it so far before it reaches like a default setting, and so to make it even lower you have to click on it and then type it in. So I typed in 0.03, and that does make it look smoother, but not smooth enough, so I'm going to go down even lower to like 0.01. And that looks way better. See, so now when we convert it into a mesh, it's not going to look so choppy around the edges where the leg lumps meet the body. Now I should be able to come up to Object and convert my largest metaball into a mesh. Once your metaball has been converted into a mesh, it should calculate all of the other metaballs that were connected to it and also connect that to the base. So everything that we just attached to our very first metaball is now an entire base mesh, and we can go ahead and delete all the rest of the other metaballs that we had attached to it. Okay, so now in my collections I only have my one metaball base, and now we can start to work on this. The first thing we're going to do is add some eyes, and then we're going to add some fangs, and then we can start to work on the legs. Okay, now we can really quickly add in the eyes for our daddy long leg. We're going to do that by hitting Shift A and choosing a regular UV sphere. We're going to bring it up a little bit and closer to where those eye lumps are, and then we're going to scale it way, way down into itty bitty little eyeballs. And then we're going to place it just so that it looks like it's just kind of sitting in there, sitting within the eye lump. Something like this. Once you have it where you like it, you can go ahead and come over to your Tools panel, and in your Modifier tab, you can select Subdivision Surface Modifier, change your view to 3 and render to 4, and apply it. Now we can mirror it to the other side along the x-axis, and now we have both of our little daddy long leg eyes. Now let's quickly add our pupils. We can hit Shift D in one of our axis views, bring it forward a little bit, and let me zoom in. And then I'm going to scale this along the Y so that it's a little bit more flat, like this. Then I'm going to scale it even smaller, and then place it within those other spheres that made our eyes. Something like that. I just want to stop for a second so I can come up here to the collection panel and name everything that I have so far. We couldn't originally name our metaballs because then it would turn them into a mesh. So now that it is already a mesh, we can come up here and name it. So I'm going to call this one the body. And then I'm going to call this one the eyeball. And we can call this one the pupil. And now I'm going to select my eyeballs and I'm going to move them in closer. Maybe move them down a little bit too. Then I'm going to select the pupils and move those closer. Just so it's a little more spider-like. Looks a little better like that, I think. To add fangs, we can use UV spheres, so let's hit Shift A. Add a UV sphere, scale it smaller, bring it to where your fang lumps are. We're going to scale it longer on the Z-axis and skinnier on the X. We want to make sure it's tucked into the fang lump, and we also want to make sure that it's tilting towards the daddy long legs, so let's rotate it on the X-axis. Let's make it a lot smaller also. And let's also rotate it on the Y-axis so that it is pointing towards the other tooth when we add it. Just a little bit. Now we're going to sculpt it the rest of the way using our sculpting tools. So let's swap to sculpt mode. And then over here in our properties panel, we can go to the top tab. And then down here in symmetry, we can make sure that our X-axis is mirroring. Try to pull this down. We want to make sure that X-axis is selected. So let's hit our G key to swap to our grab tool. And then in our bottom view right here, we can make sure that our brush is a good enough size to where it's kind of covering the whole fang. And then we can kind of shape it to look more like a fang. There we go. I'm going to zoom in and grab the top part up here and make it a little bit fatter. And the bottom part down here a little bit skinnier. And then I'm going to come to my top view and start to shape this piece. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to turn off my mirror because I want to shape the inside so that it's kind of concave. There we go. Now let's go ahead and apply our mirror modifier. So let's go back to object mode first of all. Add modifier, mirror, and mirror the body. There we go. Now we can also add a subdivision surface modifier so that we can make them smoother. Change it to 3 in the view and 4 in the render. And let's make them a little bit smaller. There we go. Those look pretty good. I'm going to tilt them a little bit more on the X-axis. This way. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, now we can apply our modifiers in the order that we created them. So apply the mirror and then apply the subdivision surface. And that is it for our fangs. So now all we have left to do is to create the legs and the eyebrows, and then we can start on the materials. So for the legs, we're going to use paths. Before we start creating the legs, I want to show you exactly how the paths are going to work for the daddy long leg. So I'm going to come over here a little bit and hit Shift A, add a curve. It's going to be a path. Drag it over to where you can see it. Drag it up a little bit. And then I want to add in my extras in my overlays if I can't see them. So if you can't see your path, you need to make sure that extras is checked. So I want to scale it a little bit smaller. And now I want to go to edit mode. And this way we can see each of our little segments and control them. So I'm going to change my shading in this main menu so that we can kind of see what's going on a little bit better. I'm going to change it to theme. That way we can kind of see this path better and see what's going on. Try to scooch my window over. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is come over to your properties panel or your tools panel, and you want to select the little path. You want to come down to geometry and you want to add some depth to it, and that's where you're going to get your actual geometry or your actual shape from. We want to make sure that it is fully filled, and then we want to fill the caps as well, which is down here. And we also want to up the resolution a little bit, so let's do that. Let's change it to 4. Actually, let's go with 5. Let's be extra today. Okay, so if you grab one of the edge segments or one of the segments that's on the end and you hit your E key, you can create a new segment and you can move that segment around. Also, if you hit your Alt key and your S key, you can scale just that part of the segment, so we can make that part pointy or extra wide depending on what it is you're trying to make. Also, you can hit your A key to select all of the segments, and then you can hit your S key to scale it larger or smaller entirely. There are also other ways to manipulate the way a path looks, but for this tutorial, all we're going to need to know and use is how to scale the ends to make them pointy like the tips of the daddy long legs, and how to extend and add more segments. Okay, now that we have the path demonstration out of the way, we can delete that path and start to place our legs. Let's hit Shift A to add in a new path. Bring it forward. And we're going to rotate it on the Z-axis just a little bit so that it's pointing outwards and forwards. Scale it down a little bit and bring it to where that front lump is. There we go. Now let's give it some depth. Ooh, not that much depth. Let's make sure it's filled. Let's give it some resolution. Let's put it at 5. And let's fill the caps. Now I want to bring it out a bit further because I just want the end of it to be sticking into that lump. It's a little bit tricky to place it. There we go. Now I want it to tilt upwards a little bit too. So I'm going to come to my side view and I'm going to hit my R key to rotate it. Tilt it so that it's upwards. Place it back into the lump. There we go. Now in my side view I can hit Shift D to add in a new path. And I can rotate that one to face forward and bring it down to where my other path is, and then rotate it in this view. we go. That looks a bit better. And then we're going to repeat this process, adding in new paths and new parts of the leg so that it's shaped the same way that an actual daddy long legs are shaped. So I'm going to speed up this part just so you guys don't have to watch me do it. But using the same method that I used for the other path in the path demonstration is what you're going to do to place all of the legs. So now I'm going to go ahead and do that in a time lapse. So a daddy long leg has about 3 segments to each leg, and we need to make sure that the body is sort of suspended instead of just sitting on the floor. So in order to control that and to know how long we need to make each segment, we can place a floor down. So let's hit Shift A and add a plane, drag it down to about here, scale it larger. That way when we're adding in each path, we can sort of know how long each one needs to be in order to have 3 segments, but so that the bottom of the front part of the foot is also touching the floor. So now I'm going to continue placing the legs now that I know how long they need to be. Okay, now that I have my legs pretty much where I want them placed, I can go ahead and turn off my floor. Let me drag my window over. Let me find my plane, turn it off, and then let me grab each one of my paths and mirror it over to the other side. Let's go to our mirror modifier and mirror each one of these paths. We don't want to apply any of our mirror modifiers yet, but we do want to select each one of our paths now, and we want to go to edit mode and grab the bottom one of each and sort of drag it out a little bit just so that it looks a little bit more realistic and a little bit bent towards the ends. And also want to hit my Alt key and my S key to scale it down so that it's nice and pointy at the tip. So now I'm going to drag it forward a little bit just so that it has that bend right here so that it looks a little bit more realistic. There we go, and I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of the legs as well. Okay, now that that part's done, we can go ahead and add UV spheres where each one of these little jointed parts are supposed to be between each leg segment. So let's hit Shift A to add in a UV sphere. Scale it really tiny. Bring it to each one of these segments. Let's bring it up. Bring it over, and you want it to be kind of tiny. I'm also going to scale mine a little bit on the y-axis just so it's a little bit longer, and then I'm going to rotate it so that's pointing this direction. There we go. And then I'm just going to manipulate and rotate and move my sphere in such a way that it looks good between each one of these segments. And I'm going to do that for each segment for all of the legs. Okay, now we have every single part of our daddy long leg except for the little eyebrows. So we're also going to use paths for the eyebrows. So let's go ahead and hit Shift A, add in a new path, bring it up, scale it really tiny, and let's bring it forward to where the eyes are. Bring it over a little bit, and then let's go ahead and give it some geometry, some depth, I mean. Let's fill it all the way, and let's up the resolution a bit, and fill the caps. Now I'm going to go ahead and scale it a bit smaller. Let's make it a little bit thicker. And then let's go into edit mode and start to bend it and shape it a little bit. I'm going to hit Alt S to scale this part smaller, and Alt S to scale this part all the way until it's really pointed. Then I'm going to bring this one down and bring the front one down a little bit too. Now I'm going to hit my A key to scale it all smaller. Now let's bring it closer to where the eyes are supposed to be. Alright, now let's go back to object mode, add a mirror modifier, and there we go. Now our daddy long leg has eyebrows. You can even give him a unibrow if you want. I think I will. I like the unibrow look. It looks pretty sweet. Let's go back to edit mode. Fix up the unibrow a little bit. There we go. I think that looks cute. Okay, so now let's go back into object mode and start turning absolutely everything into a mesh and applying all of our sweet modifiers. So let's grab our eyebrows and come up to object, convert to mesh. Now let's do the same thing for all of our paths. Okay, now I'm going to take each one of these little spheres and I'm going to apply all the modifiers. Okay, now all we have left to do is to just add materials and then add some lighting and change some of our render settings so that we can create a photo at the end. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is come over here to our properties panel, and we want to select this little camera, and we want to make sure that some of these settings are applied. Let me try to move over my window to the best of my ability. There we go. Okay, so we want to make sure that our ambient occlusion is selected. I have a hard time saying that every single time. We also want to set our bloom, turn up the threshold a little bit, and then we want to apply subsurface scattering, and also we want to make sure that our soft shadows are applied, and that's about it for this part. So I'm also going to make sure that my render engine is remaining on Eevee. You can change it to cycles if your computer isn't handling Eevee that well, but mine handles it just fine, so I'm going to keep it on Eevee. And then I'm going to drag over this window, and I'm going to change this viewport to my material view. So up here you'll see this bar, and you can select this little sphere so that you can view all the materials that you apply to the daddy long leg. I'm also going to go ahead and turn off my X and Y axis because I no longer need to see those. Turn off my overlays in these two windows as well. And then I'm going to drag this over and turn my bottom window into the shader editor so that any materials that I apply, I'll see the nodes for it in here. And then I'm going to change the shading in this top one to render view so that I can see exactly what my daddy long leg is going to look like in the render photo, or at least pretty close to what it's going to look like in the render photo. Alright, now let's go ahead and get started with placing all of our materials. Let's go ahead and swap this to the side view so we can see better. And let's select our body. And let's go ahead and add in a new material. We can just select new right here, and it'll automatically apply this sweet principled shader. And this is the only thing that we are going to be using to apply the colors to every single piece for our daddy long leg. We aren't going to be adding any kind of crazy texture, any kind of crazy design, so the principled shader is all we need. So I'm going to first change the base color. I'm going to try to look for somewhat of a brown color. This one's actually perfect. And then I want to add a little bit of subsurface, because from the picture that I'm looking at, they do have a little bit of a subsurface look to their shell. And then I'm going to add a subsurface color, which is also going to be sort of a reddish brown color. Now I'm going to turn down the specularity a little bit, and I'm also going to turn down the roughness a little bit, because their bodies are a little bit shiny looking. Since it's like a hard shell, it has a little bit of like reflection and shininess coming off of it. Alright, and let's see what else we want to change about this. I think that's about it. Okay, so now in order to apply this material to all the rest of the legs and the joints to make sure that they're all the same color, we want to come over here to our Properties tab. Let me try to drag my window over. There we go. We want to go down to our Materials tab, and we want to choose this little down arrow that's on the side, and we want to choose Copy Material. And then for each one of our legs over here, let me scooch this over. I don't want to do that. And then for each one of my legs, I can just select it, add the material, and then come over here and choose the same down arrow and choose Paste Material. And then if it doesn't show up immediately, you can just turn off and on the use nodes and it'll apply it. It kind of needs to like refresh. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this same material to each one of the legs and then each one of the joints. Okay, now let's go ahead and add a material to the fangs. Select them, add new material. Let's make the base color a little bit off-white, sort of a yellowish color. And we don't want any subsurface for that. Let's kind of lower the roughness a little bit, not too much, and also lower the specularity a little bit. That looks pretty good for those. Alright, now let's go ahead and select the pupils, give them a new color, bring it pretty close to black. Let's turn down the specularity because pupils are just holes in your eyes and they shouldn't have too much of a reflection coming from them. Alright, and then let's select our eyeballs, add a new material to those. Make it ever so slightly off-white, and let's turn down the roughness a little bit on those. There we go. Now let's select our eyebrows. Ooh, zoomed in way too close. So add a new material to those. Bring that pretty close to black. Going to turn up the roughness. Turn down the specularity. There we go. Looks pretty good to me. Okay, now we can't see the subsurface shader that we applied to the body or the legs yet because we don't have any lighting in our scene. So let's go ahead and set up everything so that we can set up our lighting. So first I'm going to change this window back to my 3D viewport, and then I'm going to hit Shift A and add in a point light, and then I'm going to bring this one to the side and somewhat behind the daddy long leg. Not that much though, it's a lot. Alright, and then I'm going to go to my light in my properties panel and I'm going to change the color to a little bit of a red. sort of a reddish orange color. And then I'm going to go to my little world over here, this little world tab, and I'm going to change my background to pretty close to completely black. Not all the way, but pretty close. Alright, and then I'm going to go back to my light, and I'm going to hit Shift A, add in an area light. This one's going to be brought forward, and then I can just hit my R key to rotate it towards the daddy long leg, and then I can move it over a little bit, rotate it towards him again. And I want to change the shape of this one. Let me swap my shading. There we go. I want to change the shape of this light to be an ellipse. And I also want to change the color to be a little bit yellow. There we go. And now I'm going to add in another light. This one's also going to be an area light. This one is going to go to the opposite side. Then I'm going to rotate it to face the daddy long leg again. And bring it forward a bit. Bring it back. Rotate it some more. Let's bring it down a little bit. Alright, now let's change the color of this one and the shape of this one. So it's going to be an ellipse shape. And let's change the color to be a little bit of a blue color. And then I'm going to lower the energy a bit. There we go. Let's kind of zoom back into our daddy long leg here. Okay, he's pretty well lit, but I want to light him up a little bit more. Let's go ahead and add in one more light. Let's make it a sun and drag it way, way up. And then let's go to our sunlight, change the color to a little bit of a yellow. And let's turn down the specularity just so he doesn't have a lot of like the reflection of it on his body. And let's lower the energy a bit. Lower it a little bit more. There we go. Now the top parts of our legs have a little bit of a light, and so does the top part of his body. So it's not too dark, and it won't appear too dark in our picture when we render it. Okay, now let's go ahead and add in a camera so that we can render out a picture. Let's hit Shift A, add a camera, drag it to the side a little bit, and drag it over. So I want to get sort of a side view of the daddy long leg. Let's go back. Alright, and now if you switch your view to the render camera, or to the current camera, you'll be able to see what you're looking at. So now we can try to rotate and manipulate our camera so that we have the right view that we want. So first I'm going to go ahead and name it render camera, render cam. And then I'm going to come down here to the cone and the spheres, and I'm going to make sure that my scene is using the render camera to render with. And then I'm going to rotate and scale my camera so that I get the view that I want. Okay, so now we can just try to render out our photo. So let's go ahead and turn off our overlays. And to render a photo from the render camera that you set active for rendering, you should be able to hit F12, and it'll immediately render from that camera's view. So that's how you create this cute and simple daddy long leg character. Hopefully you guys found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe.